And I didn't hear anything come out. So I don't know that I'm mute. Oh, I guess we'll see. So we're in Ruth, okay, and we've made ourselves, get to chapter 3. But I want to remind everybody, the reason that we study the books of the Old Testament isn't to learn about any covenant that we're under, because we're not under the old covenant. We're under the new covenant. Okay. The old covenant was a covenant between God and the nation Israel, and the laws were good. That isn't why we do it. We read the Old Testament so we can follow the line of Jesus, because Jesus started in the Old Testament. He was there from the beginning. And so that's what we study for, is to find out where he came from, his heritage, and maybe what was prophesied about him or whatever. But it's for that reason. So the Old Testament is important. Okay, turn the recorder on. I think I turned it on. I didn't hear it though. Yeah, so it seems like it's on. So I don't know about my sound over here. Like that. What's it say my volume is? 66. It should be. Without anybody on, it's hard to tell. Okay, so anyway, and Ruth's a small, it's a small book. We talked about that, before, but what they say, good things come in small packages. And that's where we are with Ruth. Ruth, and we said this is 85 verses total. But to put that in perspective, like in the book of Luke chapter 1 is 79 verses in itself. So the one chapter of Luke is like the size of the whole book of Ruth. So anyway, so what we see and what we've been seeing is that there's blessings in here, that God has these blessings packed, that God takes normal happenings and works with them supernaturally. So this story of Ruth and their travels to Moab and returning from Moab and just happening to, whatever happens in the barley fields and who this Boaz guy is, these are normal happenings, probably happened all over, Israel. But God takes those natural happenings, turns them into supernatural things. And so, we have this, we look at life a lot of times, like, especially in the Bible, as, it just so happened. It just so happened that Naomi and Ruth returned, at the time of the barley, festival, or not festival, harvesting. It just so happened that there was a law in place in the land that allowed for gleaning in the fields, that the people that don't own the fields can go into the fields and gather, the product. It just so happens that rich landowners at this time, rich landowners and poor workers are working in the fields at the same time together. So all these things just, happen. That Ruth just happened to go to the field of Boaz, and that Boaz just happened to be a relative of her late father-in-law. We go on all these just as, things. So who remembers in chapter 2 what was happening? Chapter 1 was the going to Moab, the coming back to Moab, and coming back at the barley time. Anybody remember what was happening in chapter 2? Well, she first meets Boaz. She goes into the field to glean. She asked her mother-in-law, hey, you mind if I go in the field and, get us some stuff? And she goes into the field. She is harvesting or gleaning, whatever they call it. And she meets Boaz, and she strikes Boaz as, someone worthy to care for. He's heard about her. He knows that she's been loyal to mom and, all of this. And so he tells her, he says, in so many words, he offers his protection, tells her to come back to his field, not to go to other people's fields, work with the women so that the guys don't harass you. And I've already talked to the guys, about that. So he's he's kind of a protector. So I've got in here, and you've got it in your handout. In Ruth 3, we're going to see that Ruth had to make a choice. In chapter 1, I reviewed that just now, in chapter 1, we saw that she needed redemption. Then in chapter 2, we met the man of noble character who was one of her kinsman redeemers and who was graciously providing food and safe place for her to glean. But having knowledge of one who is able to serve as kinsman redeemer and having the provisions of food and a safe place to glean were not the same as being redeemed. And that's important to know. We may live in a Christian nation. We may have the benefits of a Christian society, whatever those benefits used to be anyway, like that you fall into that thing of, I'm a Christian. I live in America, I'm a Christian. But the question is, are you redeemed? You've got all the benefits of that redemption except for the actual redeeming itself. And Ruth doesn't have that yet. So right in there. So in chapter 3, we're going to discover that Ruth had an important decision to make. And so then we get into verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. So Naomi, she wants, remember, it's her daughter-in-law that she picked up while she was in Moab, but she wants to provide her with peace. And what's peace for a foreign, widowed woman in a foreign land? Find a husband, because women in those days, they were totally dependent, on men. If it wasn't their father, it was their husband. If it wasn't their husband, it was the brothers, it was the clan. Not the Ku Klux Klan, but the clan. They were always dependent on others. So she's so Ruth wants to find her a husband, and here she's working kind of specifically at Boaz as the kinsman, as the redeemer. I've got this thing. I found this somewhere years ago. I don't remember where I found it, but I thought it appropriate here. It says, Naomi wants to step in. She wants to speed things up. The good news is this. Boaz has continued to be both respectful and chivalrous, and has kept Ruth under his protection. But for Naomi, the bad news is that Boaz hasn't done nothing more than be gracious. In other words, it's like, okay, he's a nice guy. He's helping my daughter-in-law, but what are we going to do to get that spark going? Because remember, she's a good Jewish mom. It says, if she were to write for counsel from a second millennial BC advice column, it might read like this. Dear Abby, my widowed daughter-in-law has daily contact with an older man who shows concern about her and respect for her. In fact, from the moment he saw her, he was deeply interested and has treated her like a princess. But fast forward 2 months, and he still has not said one word to take their relationship to the next level. She likes him, but he's not getting any younger. How do we get him to ignite his inertia to light this lethargy to cancel his coma? Signed, Befuddled in Bethlehem. Yeah. But that's what Ruth's working on. She's working on, I got to do something for Ruth. So, and Naomi was befuddled. I mean, Boaz clearly has no intention at this point of getting married, striking up a relationship. We don't know what that age difference is. I mean, it sounds like he's a generation above Ruth's, so, Ruth could be as young probably as 25 at this point, because remember, well, we don't know when she got married in Moab. We just know that they were there for 10 years, and maybe she was 15 and got married on the last year. We don't know, but if she was 15, 16, 17, got married, time passed, so she could be 25, and maybe Boaz is 50, and then if Boaz hasn't been married yet, I mean, I would guess that wealthy to do guys that are 50 probably aren't going to get married. I mean, it's just not in their plan. That doesn't mean they won't, but I mean, that's probably not in their plan. So she's got to work it out. So she's got advice here in verse 3 for Ruth. She says, "Wash therefore and anoint yourself and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." Now, what's happening here? Hang on, I'm gonna get your sheet here. Because on the back of your sheet, I've got some terms used in this chapter. These are, this is terminology that we may not be, familiar with. So Naomi told Ruth that he's down in the threshing floor winnowing. Now, what is winnowing? I mean, has anybody here winnowed? Yeah, huh? You've actually winnowed? Tell us what winnow is.
On the wheat that goes through a winnow machine, blow air through it and knock off the grains and blow the shaft into the stuff.
Yeah, okay, that's a modern version of what it is. So the threshing floor is a flat concreted area, and the threshing is they would have the wheat, and I'm reading this, okay? I mean, I haven't done it. They would stomp on the wheat. Anybody ever see the I Love Lucy when they're stomping the grapes? No, but they're walking on the wheat. They have the cattle walk on the wheat, and it breaks up and separates the two parts, the grain from the chaff, like that. So that's what they do, and that's what they do on a threshing floor. And then the winnowing comes, they take a winnowing fork, which I think would be a pitchfork, but I don't know, like that, and they would scoop it up and throw it up in the air, and they would try to do it in the evening when the Mediterranean winds come through, like that. And what would happen is that the grain would fall down because it was heavier, and the chaff would blow away, like that. So now here's the thing. I mean, because she said that he was, where did that say that? Oh yeah, so in verse 2 it says, "See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor." So not only is he the landowner, I mean, he's a hard worker. He's there at night doing doing the work. So Naomi's thinking, okay, this is good husband material here. Okay. So anyway, so that's what the winner is. So it said to go down and uncover his feet. Let's wait, we'll get back to that when she actually does it, okay? So, and he will tell you what to do. So Naomi's instructing Ruth. She tells her to go wash, to anoint herself, which I take is to put on the perfume and, like that. Dress well, go to the threshing floor where Boaz is. She's also told not to reveal herself to Boaz until he's finished eating and drinking, like that. So,
In other words, getting drunk.
what's that? Yeah, I know. Yeah. Now, we don't know. We don't know if he's gets drunk or if he just gets a little high or he just gets relaxed. Yeah. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Ray and I were talking about the eighth commandment. Don't bear false witness. But the idea is that with Luther is that you build up your brother. You put the best construction on what you. So we would say, well, probably us because we're rotten, sinful people. But we would say, look at him, he's getting drunk. What you're supposed to say is, well, he's probably relaxing. He's had a hard day. He's had a hard day. Had a hard day at work. Okay. Anyway, but she tells Ruth, to watch where Boaz lies down and to approach him quietly, uncover his feet, and lie down. We'll get to it though. And she, in verse 5, were you going to say something, Ray? Oh.
Is that when they were big whoopsies?
Well, see, these are the things, especially in the Old Testament, because the Old Testament's so long ago and it's so cultural, is you read a dozen different interpretations of what this means, and I don't think anybody really, really knows, except me. Because I read a website. Well, we'll get to it. Anyway, so in verse 5, and she replied, all that you say, I will do. And Ruth's like this. Ruth is obedient to let's put it this way. She trusts Naomi enough to know that Naomi probably gives good advice. Remember what was Naomi's first bit of advice to Ruth? Go home. You don't want to get into this mess that I'm going back to. Go back to your parents' house. Like that. So anyway, so she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly to uncover his feet and lay down. So his heart's merry. He's got a full meal, got some good wine, He's looking out at probably a full harvest. That's probably the biggest thing that gives him a merry heart. So, and then it said there in 6 and 7, Mary goes to the threshing floor after Boaz is asleep and uncovers his feet and lies down. Boaz, I don't think, is a light sleeper. You'd think somebody comes creeping up on you, and you got to remember, think how dark it is. Okay, you drive around these streets here around the church, where there's no, street lights, city lights. It's dark. If you've ever done that and turn your own lights out while you're driving down the street, just to see how dark it is. It is dark. So, here's what I've read. The uncovering of the feet is Ruth's way of proposing, or the cultural way to propose marriage to Boaz. Okay. Now, how far that uncovering of the feet goes, do you have an opinion on that, Linda? No, but we don't know. I mean, and there's other examples in the Old Testament of uncovering the feet, and they mean different, they mean different things, so we don't know. But it's her way, yes, Andy.
Call footsies?
Well, it could be. I mean, I don't know. But and I go with this, that it's her way of proposing. Now, how many times do we see in the Old Testament where the women propose to the men? Huh?
Done.
None. That's what makes this a little bit strange. But what's the only day that we can do that? Where the women can propose to the men? Sadie Hawkins Day. Who would have guessed they had Sadie Hawkins Day back in the Old Testament? What's that?
He's not running a lot that large.
Yeah. No, I mean, for us, that's what that is. But this seems to be a more solemn way of.
You think it could have been that she knew that he might be interested, but was not willing to approach her, so she uncovered his feet, which is, I am interested in you too.
Yeah, well, we know he's got interest in her more so than probably the other ladies working in the field. But maybe he's proper enough to know the age difference, the status difference. She's a foreign lady too. I mean, could you imagine our president being married to a foreign lady? I mean, that just would never, that would just never happen. No, so he probably have a reputation to keep, and he seems to be that kind of a guy, but he goes, I got that reputation to keep and like that. And so he's not going to make the first move. So, yeah. So Ruth probably doesn't recognize, Naomi recognizes it though. See, Naomi's a bigger character in this story than I think most people give her, credit for, because you always hear about Ruth and Boaz, and then Naomi will get honorable mention and, like that. But, it seems like she's kind of the driving force, behind this, because she's kind of the, Ruth's Holy Spirit. Right? Pardon? The men. So again, so if Boaz was a generation, like I say, I just picked out those numbers, like if he were 50 and and she were 25, but that does show like a generation difference, like that. So yeah, right.
I'm thinking too, that they might have known something that not in here, that might have been in Deuteronomy that says, if you do this in this particular fashion, then you are basically, like she said in the next sentence, that if you cover me, then I am under your protection.
Right. Well, we get to that, like that, but
But like in some states, if you introduce a person as your wife 3 times, you legally, or you have her as a common law wife.
yeah, that's why I don't use that term when I introduce my wife. I don't want it to be binding. Wait, what did you say, Dennis?
Very fast.
Oh,
But there's lots of states that have that, that was, historical law that says that if you introduce somebody as your wife,
You gotta go
that's
first.
3 times, and then she becomes a common law wife, she's entitled to half your property, and so on and so forth.
that could be, because again, the customs here with Boaz and Ruth and Naomi, that could be an old American custom in that, and I'm just talking off the top of my head here since you mentioned it, but is that because the woman would have expectations, because you keep telling people that you're the wife, therefore I have these expectations that I'm your wife and that you've made this commitment. So
Lee Marvin found out about it with telephone.
yeah, there you go. Anyway, so again, their customs, who knows, when did wedding licenses even, even begin? I mean, we say, well, you have to follow the law of the land, and so you have to get married. But I mean, when did that marriage before a judge or with a legal document or, when did that,
Money.
pardon?
Right.
Yeah.
John,
They need, yeah, Linda.
Can attest that it was at least in the 1860s. I have a certificate of marriage. And it cost a whole penny from my great grandparents in
Yeah.
1864.
Was it something that was filed with the courts?
I think so.
I mean, maybe I
Yeah.
I don't know. Like you take church weddings. Luther wasn't for church weddings. Luther's initial idea was he wanted once a year for all the married people to gather at the steps of the church and he would give them a blessing, So because what other's so special about the church wedding? I mean, if he's giving you a blessing on your wedding, I mean, on your marriage, that's all you're gonna get in a church wedding, really. But now everybody wants a church wedding, even if they don't come to church. Yeah, and pardon? Without kidding. Joe,
You have two separate areas in relation to marriage. The first one being,
hey, do me a favor, talk louder, just so when I'm watching it, I can tell if I pick up this conversation louder with you talking louder.
it's actually two different issues. One is your commitment, spiritual commitment, because when you have a church wedding, you are making a commitment to your spouse, but you are also making that commitment to God, okay? It's the promise. Where the secular marriage has to do with strictly the secular legality. In other words, what portion of property and ownership and so forth is involved in that contract, quote unquote. And it's a contract where in church, it's actually a spiritual commitment on your behalf.
If they're both Christians.
Well, it's supposed to be, even if you're not Christian.
Well, I wasn't. See, I wasn't Christian when I got married. Yeah.
You're making that promise before God. It doesn't matter if you're Christian or not. And that's the problem that we have with so many divorces now, is they don't recognize that they made a promise to God.
So, and this goes back. So why do they get married in the church and then file papers with the state?
Well, the papers with the faith state is the secular side of it. In other words, that's setting up your legal commitment in the secular world, having to do with property values, etc.
that's civil, that goes to civil court.
No, I understand that. I mean, could you just get married in a church? Would you marry someone in church without doing the state stuff? Or could you? I mean,
No, not legally allowed.
yeah, see, it's all tied in with I only bring this up because we have to see what Ruth and Boaz are eventually doing here is they've got I would say probably a legally binding marriage without involving.
Any secular.
Right, yeah, but it's legally binding. I mean, I have no idea what the divorce laws were back then, if property or kids.
Society
Yeah.
would be the binding situation. Once they make that declaration by their action, then their relatives and the society around them
Yeah.
hold them to that commitment.
Yeah, no, that's,
Okay, which is a different, well,
Yeah.
now we've split it where you really have. The law doesn't hold you to that commitment in the secular world, and if you're not, like you said, a Christian, you're not held to it in the spiritual world.
yeah.
You are, but you'll pay a price later.
I mean, don't tell me what happened here in this ceremony of the uncovering of the feet, but what if what if Boaz got up the next morning and said, I don't think so.
In the old days, all he had to do was write a note, say, of course you can give it.
Yeah,
He would pull the covers back over himself.
Cover his feet back up, and go back to sleep.
It's just a valve.
Wait, Andy,
Or they could jump the roof.
wait, start over again.
You go back to the 1600s, 1700s, all records were recorded to a church. You're married,
Oh, right.
death, you're whatever. And my mother and her cousin went one year throughout the state of Maine, got whole records for her family. And, that's the only place you get the most of the, public buildings within the forest area has been burned.
Right.
Through the years. And that's if you wanted to know something, it was all done right in the church.
Cindy, was it you or Cindy Buntmeyer that did the genealogy stuff? Buntmeyer did it, yeah. Cindy Buntmeyer was always big into the, all the genealogy stuff and church records. Because those places like Ancestry and all that, that's where they get a lot of that stuff, is going back through church records and our red book, right?
Full of information.
Yeah, like that. So, but see, it was all church stuff, which probably goes back to what Joe was saying. The society is the one that is keeping the record and, doing it. Pastor.
I was thinking more about it, that I could marry someone, but because we're to honor and respect civil authorities.
Yeah.
Unless it goes against the word of God, then that would be the reason, but, you don't really need the civil stuff or the benefits or property and tax, benefits, things like that, but you could, like,
Right.
nothing biblical that.
That's where we get into a lot of problem today with all the, same-sex marriage stuff, and that is churches feeling that they can't say no, or the laws trying to change that say you can't tell them they can't have a wedding. I know some pastors who have gotten out of the civil side of the marriage. They tell people to go down and get your license, go get married at City Hall, come back and we'll have a church wedding. Like that, because that way you don't have to end up by marrying people that you don't want to, want to marry. I know that we've got it in our bylaws that we don't, but no telling when the gendarme comes one day banging on the door. That's French for police. I'm multilingual. Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
I just did a deep dive on, question, is there anything in Deuteronomy?
Let me sit down while he does this.
About marriage procedures, and said, yes, Deuteronomy gives several laws and procedures concerning marriage, many of which provide background to what we see in the story of Ruth and Boaz. Here are the key ones, and then list the whole thing about if a soldier kills her husband, and what reprisal he can expect, or what he might do if he wants to marry her, and so on and so forth, and just inheritance of birthright rights and forbidden marriages, Holy Land, and things like that. It just goes on and on and on. I think it's about 15 pages in all.
Yeah. Let's see. Send those to Deacon Dennis. Anyway, but what we're gonna find is that Boaz can't marry her. Because he's not the redeemer, he's not the kinsman redeemer. Like that, so maybe they only get to the footsie part. We don't know. So it said, but anyway, but think about this. Naomi is hooking Ruth up with cousin Boaz. But I mean, he's a relative, and here she's hooking him up to a relative, like that. Anybody here hook their daughters up with cousin Bob? Probably not.
Jump the broom.
Huh?
They had a show on TV called Jump the Broom. The kids getting married. That was the thing from the slaves.
Oh.
Because they couldn't get married.
Hmm.
They jumped.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah.
Marriage ceremony. Couldn't unjump it.
Yeah, I'm sorry?
Naomi's motivated. That was her bread and butter, her, she was gonna be sustained by her Ruth and Boaz. So I was thinking she was very motivated to try to get Ruth married.
Right, no, I mean, this is going to redeem Naomi. It's gonna redeem the land, redeem Naomi, redeem the whole situation. This is where we get the Jesus and the kinsman redeemer, is that Jesus is going to redeem the whole thing. He's gonna redeem the Jews, he's gonna redeem the Gentiles. It talks about at the end of Revelation, it talks about the new heaven and the new earth, and about bringing all things back to the way they were, say, like in the garden. That's what that whole redeeming is. So for a Jewish family, them just getting their land back, getting their status back, whatever. See, again, we don't think like them. We don't live in their culture. So we would say, what's the big deal? Like my daughter one time, when she was between divorces, but she said, she goes, I don't need a man. She goes, I got a good job. I got a good 401k. I got a good this. So her attitude towards these types of things would be, who cares? But that isn't the way their attitude, was, in that. Who had a hand up? Nobody had a hand up. So it says that, verse 8, it says, at midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. So it's the middle of the night. He wakes up and he finds Ruth at his feet. In verse 9, he said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. You got to remember, it's dark. And if we take uncovering his feet in the best sense, she's down at his feet. His eyeballs are up here, and his feet are way down there, and it's pitch black, and he's trying to figure out, it could be a raccoon chewing on his toes. He doesn't know, So she said, I'm Ruth, your servant. And this is what Ray was talking about. She says, spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Okay, but this spread your wings over your servant comes from something back in chapter 2, where Boaz was making kind of a prophetic prayer over Ruth. And he said, put yourself under my wings, which is talking about that. So it's almost like she's coming back at him saying, here I am. I mean, you're my redeemer. I'm under your wings for your protection. So, but she probably means more about it than what Boaz meant. So, let's see. In verse 10, in verse 10, he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. So he's saying that he's kind of honoring her proposal, noting her kindness, and that she stayed devoted. She could have gone after, all the single guys in the field, like that, but she didn't. She'd been loyal to Naomi. She'd been loyal to God, and even to Boaz. She didn't engage in immorality. She did not remarry outside the family, because she could have done that. You gotta remember, she's from a foreign land. I don't know how well versed she is on the customs at this point in time. And that may be why she has Naomi's covering to guide her, through this. But when she says that you are the Redeemer, she's making an appeal to the Levirate laws, the Levirate redemption, Levirate marriage. And I think we talked about this a little before. We'd spoken about this in the story in Genesis 38 when we were doing something around the holidays, Jewish holidays, is that, I can't remember her name now. Judah and Rahab. No, not Rahab. Who was the, oh, I can't remember her name. Anyway, the lady, and her husband died, and the son was supposed to, Onan was supposed to, there were the Levirate law was the brothers were supposed to take care of it. They had the dead, the dead older brother take care of the wife, father a child with them who would have the rights of the older brother, not the one who, impregnated, the woman. And the Levirate law goes like this. It's in Deuteronomy 25. It says, if brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside of the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife and perform the duties of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of the dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. You got to remember, if you got no kids, your lineage is gone. That's the end of the line. And if the man does not wish to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go to the gate of the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. So if, I'm Deacon Dennis's brother and Deacon Dennis dies, I'm to do whatever to perpetuate that line through his wife. But if I don't, I say no, like that, then Dennis's wife goes to the city gates, whatever the city gates would be today, and announces he refuses to do this because this is going to relieve her of some, duty and scorn. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him. And if he persists, saying, I do not wish to take her, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull his sandal off his foot, and spit in his face. And she shall answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And the name of his house shall be called in Israel, the house of him who has not had his sandal pulled off. That was a mouthful. But that was the ritual. Now you go on Facebook and say that dirty rotten scum wouldn't do the, whatever like that. But that was the custom. And so, and this is what the Redeemer, which would be Boaz in this case, was required to do. Didn't matter even if he wanted to do it, was required to do, and he would have to break that commitment publicly in order not
I
to.
was just gonna say, it's all done publicly, they're good.
It's all done publicly. Yeah, and and that again, that goes back to something that Joe had said earlier about the marriages, about the community holding people accountable for the commitments that they, that they made. And we don't, I saw a hand, Ray.
So basically Boaz is sort of like a proxy husband,
Is what?
a proxy husband.
No, because I mean,
But
and I don't, because he could have a wife.
He's going to impregnate Ruth.
Right.
Ruth is going to have a baby, and the baby is going to be on the behalf of her ex.
Right. No, I mean, that's exactly what it is. I just don't know about the term proxy. I mean, I guess, he's the kinsman. I mean, he's the kinsman, and the kinsman is one who will stand up for the family. You got a family that has no resources to defend themselves or, take the beatings of the other people in the town. It's the kinsman that's supposed to stand up and protect the people that he's the redeemer for. Okay, so again, these are things we don't understand. We understand them in the way that they've come down to us, and chances are a lot of it's just made up, or it's been filler. It's been filler that's come down, and so that's what we know. But how are you going to go back in time, to know? You read some of the Jewish writings that have come after the time of Jesus, because we don't really have anything Jewish writings really before the time of Jesus. I mean, other than the scriptures themselves, of people interpreting this to say, no, this was the Jewish view. I mean, if it's out there, I haven't found it yet. To say, this is the Jewish view of the book of Ruth that was written 200 years before now. This is our view. You don't have that.
Maybe there is a difference though, in the one case, the brother is just supposed to help provide a child for that person. In this case, they're getting married. So maybe it's slightly different.
Yeah. Okay, so if we go to 11, so that's what she's appealing to. When she's appealing to him, it's this Deuteronomy 25 passage. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. So she has a reputation. In the short time that, we don't know what time period has passed since they returned. I mean, it's the beginning of the Harley Davidson Festival, the Barley Festival, and or harvesting, and to the point that they've gotten, I don't know, a couple of months maybe. I don't know what the harvesting is like, but they know that she has a reputation. Maybe she has a reputation of being, even though it wasn't written yet, that Proverbs 31 woman, about being honorable and industrious and, loyal and, all those things. Maybe that's the reputation she has. But anyway, Boaz is committing to do what she wants. I would think that means he's accepting her proposal. Yes. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. It's almost like she found out his identity. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. So in this whole pecking order, here's this redeemer that's closer to the family relation than Boaz is. So this is something that he needs to take care of. So he tells her, remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning. So the best that he can do is say, I'm going to go to this redeemer, this closer redeemer. I'm going to tell him, okay, here's what you got. You got the widow Naomi, the widow Ruth, a mortgaged land. You want to take them over? Okay. This creates problems for him, because if this closer redeemer, if he has properties, if he has children who have claims to the properties, and now he's going to take on this new, obligation, how's that going to affect what he already has? And we'll see next chapter, he goes, I don't think so. Yeah. But what if he would have said, yeah, then we wouldn't have had any Ruth and Boaz love story. Yeah. And then he could have been a mean old guy and whipped her while she worked in the fields. And that story wouldn't play very well, would it? Let's see. He said, where'd I leave off here? Here, until morning. Yeah, so in verse 14, so she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another, which means it's dark still. Okay. And said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. So he said, let's be discreet about this. And he said, bring the garment you were wearing and hold it out. So she held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. And then she went into the city. So he gives her a parting gift. Yeah, you get a parting gift. I'm gonna give you 6 measures of barley. We don't know how much that is. I mean, let's put it this way. It was probably a good amount, but it was probably also something she could carry. Because whatever garment she had, whether she wore it as, some kind of a sash thing that you would like carry a baby in or something like that. I mean, so how much could she carry? Yeah, don't know. 40 pounds? I don't know. That's a lot even.
Well, she was a hard working woman.
That's right. No. Again, so. And then, he said, anyway, she went in the city, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Sound effects provided by me. You must not go back empty. Wait a minute. He said, then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law." Maybe that's a way of him saying, your idea is working here. I don't know. But she replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." So Naomi's confident that it's going to work out fine. There was a statement earlier where I don't remember what it was in my paper, where he said, I can't find it. Where he made an oath. He made a solemn oath that he was going to do it as the Lord lives. And that's about as high of a solemn oath that you can give. So it says, and that's it. The waiting begins. We wait until we hear back from Boaz, which will be in chapter 4. On the bottom of your page there, I had those things for the definitions for the different things. I also got verses of wisdom that come from this. Proverbs 3, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will make straight your paths. In other words, we know that God's working in our lives. You just need to trust it and not, don't live by what you see in your own understanding of things. Psalm 37 says, commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. And in Hebrews 11, it says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So it's all those things that it's all in God's hands, whether we see it or not. And also, to be clear about it too, is even if it doesn't come about in our lifetimes, God makes it, God will make it work. So, Ray.
Yeah, in the footnote.
Oh, wrong Ray. Okay, hang on. Okay.
Oh, really?
No, go ahead.
So basically, it was 3 meals for 2 people. Worth of grain.
3 lean cuisines, that's what he gave her?
Yeah.
Well, wait, maybe we need to reevaluate this guy. It's like what?
Measure is enough for 1 week.
Oh,
So 6 measures
yeah,
divided by 2 is 3 meals for the 2.
okay, got it.
Here's your daily bread. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you got that too, don't you? Okay, so next week we will do chapter 4, and we will be done with the book of Ruth. Any last? The other Ray. Or are you the original Ray? He's the other Ray.
Well, the question that I asked on AI was the fact that, that the only property actually belongs to her husband. He's dead. She goes to Moab and stays there for 10 years. She comes back and she's still got property rights. But she can't sell the property.
I don't know that she still has the property rights. I think that I think he gave up his, I think he gave up his inheritance when he left Moab. I think as a sign of a lack of faith in going to Moab. This is me. Is going to Moab, he gave up what he had. Remember, there's a famine. The land probably isn't worth anything, at that time. Probably got sold for taxes. I don't know, but I'm just saying that, as I think that somewhere in there, Boaz is going to talk about redeeming the land.
Yeah.
So it's probably in chapter 4 if we haven't got to it yet, but the land is up for, up for grabs. Any other last question before we don't do this anymore? Okay, let me see what this says.